Hello, welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand. My name is John Galloway. I'm a program manager on the .NET community team. And I'm happy to be joined today by Javier and some friends he brought along, repeat guests. So we've got Unai and Luis, and they're and they're going to be talking about Balea authorization framework. I almost said authentication framework. I'm glad I got that right. Can we start with some quick introductions? Javier, you're what have you been working on recently?
Sure. So, hello everyone. I'm Javier. I'm a senior software engineer in the ASP.NET Core team. I've been mostly working on Blazor or upcoming Blazor desktop support, other stuff that we're not ready to talk about, and in general, MVC and Blazor.
Great. And then Unai and Luis, you're both working at Plain Concepts, and so today we're going to be talking about Balea authorization framework.
Yes.
So, awesome, that's exciting. All right, well, as always, we start with some community links, so I'm going to jump right to that. I've got some great links for you today, and let me see. I will throw up the banner for this, and we'll also throw it in the chat, so it's all over the place. And then we'll dig right in. All right. Somebody asked, what is Balea? That's what the show is about. It is an authorization framework, and we will be talking about it quite soon. All right. So here we go. First of all, OpenTelemetry reaches 1.0. So that's exciting. We've had some shows on OpenTelemetry before with Saurabh. And so OpenTelemetry is a CNCF project. It spans a lot of different, it spans the whole ecosystem, and, it's a whole kind of distributed observable tracing system. And it's got all the good things. It's vendor neutral. It's got broad community support. And so in this post, Rob talks about the release. So the specification went 1.0 in February, and along with that, we have the .NET SDKs for that also being released. So that's pretty cool. So he goes through and shows for application developers how you can instrument your code for distributed tracing, and then he also shows, how you can hook that in, especially with things like ASP.NET Core instrumentation, client, etc., different exporters. He also then digs into it a little bit with specific information for library authors, how you can instrument things so that it'll bubble up and be observable in your client applications. So, and then he shows the cool thing with OpenTelemetry is that it's broadly supported, so you can observe your distributed tracing in a lot of things. And so here he shows with Zipkin, and I've been looking at this more lately with Project Thai because it's so easy to pull in Zipkin image and get those really cool graphics and stuff. So exciting, and congratulations. All right, this is a cool post from MissionIll on my team, and whoa, I blew that way up. Hello, Nish. So here he's talking about cloud native learning resources for .NET developers. So we've been recently kind of looking at different topic areas and trying to refresh all the things, the content, the guidance, the learn modules, do any kind of deep dive shows and stuff. And so for this month, we've been looking at microservices. And so Nish kind of runs all the stuff with, especially like the architecture guidance, and does a lot of stuff with microservices. So this is a great post on that. So he builds up starting with things like, the getting started tutorials, 101 videos. This is a cool video. There's a series on this. So here's Shane Boyer and Leslie talking through that. There's also a really cool thing, which is my next link, which is a Let's Learn Microservices thing coming up. So, and then there's a lot of deep dive stuff. So kind of hands-on and architecture books. And cloud native gets complicated quickly. There's a lot of complexity, and patterns are important. So here's all the stuff, and including things like modernizing applications. I talked to a lot of WCF devs with large applications and they ask about, how do I modernize? Here's an example of, our in-depth guidance on how to do that. So great in-depth post, a lot of resources for cloud native stuff. And of course, he ends with eShop on containers, which is kind of our reference sample and shows a lot of in-depth kind of real world stuff. So there you go. Oops, I actually linked to the wrong one. The one I meant to was ak.ms let's learn.net. See if I got that right. Woo, I got it right. So this is this is coming up on Friday, and this is Let's Learn Microservices. And so this is a course for absolute beginners. It's okay. You can share this with people that are just learning, or if you're just learning.net, that's great. So they're going to start with the fundamentals. What are microservices? Why do you care? And then it's a workshop style approach. So just build your first microservice and get started with a simple deployment. So this is Jamie and Shane, and we welcome everyone to come and learn. Okay, this is just a nice quick tip from Damian Bowden, and this is about setting dynamic metadata for a Blazor WebAssembly. So I first misread this, and I thought he was talking about setting assembly metadata, and he's talking about setting the Open Graph tags. So these are the HTML tags in their meta tags, and it's all this OG title, OG image, and OG does not stand for Original Gangster. It stands for Open Graph. And I always misread it the first time. These are all the tags that show up when you fill these in correctly, especially with the right images and titles. Then when links are shared, most clients will show the link previews correctly. So this is how, when you do copy and paste with Edge and paste in Windows, it copies in the right title and URL, those sorts of things. This is where that stuff comes from. So this is actually really easy to set, and he just shows, setting in a page model and setting the metadata, and then the place where that's bound to up here in the HTML head. So just a quick, resource for anyone that doesn't know. Jeff Fritz has been doing this. Learn C# with Jeff Fritz with C# Fritz, and he's been doing Blazor recently. So there's a ton of good stuff, all kinds of just deep dive and all sorts of things. So make sure you watch those things. This is cool. The writer team is announcing that they have added in scaffolding for ASP.NET Core projects. And the magic that makes this work is scaffolding is a .NET global tool, and they're able to hook into that and light that up. So this is pretty neat. And, it's great that ASP.NET Core is open source and cross-platform and supported by a lot of different vendors. So it's always awesome to see this light up across the community. So congratulations to the JetBrains teams. And this is neat. And again, it's cool. They call this out towards the end of the post, how they're building this up using that ASP.NET code generator .NET global tool. So good stuff. Okay, this post, and I forget his name. This is from Mangesh. So he is talking in this post about a dashboard and hooking up the dashboard from an Azure Cosmos DB using Azure Functions to serve as an API or surface that data and push it out through Azure SignalR service and then consume it using Blazor. So he shows, if you wanted to just do something with polling, it's not very efficient. There's a lot of problems with it. He shows this is kind of the great diagram that explains what he's doing. So this is subscribing. There's a Cosmos database trigger. As new data comes in, then the Azure function grabs that and then pushes it out through the Azure SignalR service, and then he consumes that in the browser using Blazor. So he just kind of walks through the things. Here's the thing where we're subscribing to that feed. So we have that Cosmos DB trigger. And then, easy enough to hook that up through the Azure SignalR service. I like here that it's the ads, even though I'm in the private window, it's showing me the shoes that I should be getting. So that's nice. So, and then what's cool with this, all these services he's talking about, especially like Azure Functions and SignalR service, are actually really cheap. And so this is a great way to get a real-time dashboard and be able to, have this live view, and it's actually really cheap because you're only paying for what you're using. So anyways, here's the Azure function receiving, and then he ends up with the Blazor project and hooking up Blazor, hook it up to the SignalR hub, and then consume it. And then he makes it nicer with some chart.js in the Blazor application. So anyways, at the very end, you end up with a cool final output that shows nice live updating charts. So that's always neat. So thank you, Megnesh. All right, on to the next. This is a fun one from Neil Swinberger, and he's talking about creating zip files on an HTTP request. And the problem with a lot of sample code that you'll see is that it uses intermediate files, and especially under some load, it's pretty inefficient. So the idea here, he grabbed a bunch of the .NET Bot having a fun day icons from the repository, from the .NET brand repository. And then he shows hooking this up using stream. So here he's using a memory stream. And he walks through then a few different implementations of doing this, doing it in MVC, doing it using an endpoint, etc. So here's using the MVC controller. And so, the important thing is using the stream, and I'll dig deeper into that in a second. So he walks through showing how to do that using a file stream result, and then also from a Razor page, and then also from an endpoint. So, and all the code is in a repository that he links to. So this is all really cool. What's really neat though is afterwards he tweeted about it. And David Fowler, who's always on the watch for inefficient code, says, well, you should use I action result. And then he talks about, the real thing is, oops, I got a link here to get the thing. Okay. So he and Niels go back a bit about, whether how this could be better optimized. For instance, not using a memory stream, and how we could allocate, should they use pipes, etc. And so based on that, Niels updated it further, and it's buried somewhere in the thread for this. But the neat thing is he actually is continuing to update this. I chatted with him more this morning. He's updating in the repo. And the end result here is pretty neat. This is actually using a body writer, context response body writer as stream. And the thing he's showing, it's a little hard to see, but as he's stepping through the actual, you can see it streaming the result down. And so this is, where I'm pointing the mouse over here in the corner, it's actually streaming as he steps through. And this is all done without using the using backing files. So, all right, just a few more. This one's fun. There was a recent thing that I shared, and it was just a tweet, and it was from Cecil Phillip about this kind of hidden feature that's been around since .NET Core 3, and it is the Get Debug view. So Get Debug view helps you understand where your configuration is coming from. ASP.NET Core configuration is really extensible, and it's layered so that you can pull in configuration from all kinds of different configuration providers. It could be a JSON file, it could be Key Vault, it could be Azure App Service configuration. You can write your own configuration providers, etc. But the problem with that is it can be difficult to understand where your actual values are coming from. So that's what this does for you, is you can just map this Get Debug view, and it'll actually show that. So what's cool with this is Andrew then dug into this and said, hey, I hadn't seen this either, and let's see how it works. So here's an example of what you get when you call debug view, and it shows which provider provided which values. So, he's explaining that. Here's that output. And in this case, we've got secrets.json, we've got different app settings, we've got environment variables, and we've got memory. So then, Andrew being Andrew, he actually digs into what the source does and how it actually works. And so this is, I think, the really neat stuff is he just talks about how it's actually reading from all these different views or the providers, and, formatting and outputting and all that kind of stuff. So just always neat to understand that. And then he also shows, how you can actually expose that debug view. And it's neat that you've got the data available. You could actually, hide it in a footer. You could do whatever you wanted, to save this information. I would not hide it in a footer. That would be a bad idea. But but you can use this in your, debugging and outputting orchestration stuff. Okay. One more before I pass over to you. And this is a neat one from Rick Strahl. So Rick Strahl always kind of digs into things in depth. And I like about Rick Strahl that he also never holds back if something's frustrating or confusing or whatever. He'll say what he doesn't like or whatever about it. So here he talks about role-based JOT tokens in ASP.NET Core. And he goes through a few different ththings. He talks about authentication, using them. And he also talks about signing roles. And so, here's an example where we create a token, and then we can, this is manually creating a token and then assigning, setting up the middleware, adding claims to it, and some different things. And then he talks about, consuming and invalidating. However, this is all at a very kind of low level. This is directly manipulating the token. And as we were talking about it before the call, this is an area where Balea can help. So actually, I think now's a good spot where I can pass over to you and we can talk more about what you've built. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And so first of all, you told me last time when I think we had Zabril on, Balea is an animal because all your projects are named after animals. So I looked it up, and Balea is a whale, correct?
A whale,
yes.
Okay, all right. So what is Balea, and how does it help?
Okay, so yeah, Balea. Most of the people maybe are wondering about what these guys develop an authorization framework if ASP.NET Core has itself an authorization out of the box that is well designed, so extensible, and it's amazing. Okay, but the problem for us is when you are going to create some enterprise application, you need some time to do additional stuff, like for example, creating some tables, for roles, permissions, or role-based access control. Mm-hmm. Maybe you have some more complex business logic using some more natural language that we are going to show you next. Some language that we can create an authorization language, okay, without coding C#. This is one of the reason in our company we work with many customers, and in our teams, most of the team are doing every time the same stuff in some projects. So we decided to create this framework. Another problem is regardless with the JOT tokens. Some people misunderstanding the difference between authentication and authorizations attempt to store authorization information in the identity provider in tokens. It's quite common, okay? In most of the customers that we've seen this implementation, is like you add to the JOT tokens some claims, for example, roles or permissions or whatever, okay? So this approach has problems like permission in this case depends on the applications, and sometimes in complex business rules that is not easier than adding some roles or some permissions. Another problem is regardless with the expiration type of tokens. If you know JOT tokens there are two kinds of tokens, self-contained and referent tokens. The most useful tokens are JOT tokens, self-contained tokens, sorry. The problem is that this token has an expiration time. If you add some permissions, some roles, and some authorization in this token, okay, you can change these permissions on this authorization in real time. You have to wait until the token expires in order to remove these permissions, and the user recover a new token with the fresh permissions. So it could be a problem, a potential problem, because you have some leak. You maybe want to disable in real time some permissions on some roles. That with this kind of reference token, you can't. Okay. Another problem is that the size of the token increase a lot, because sometimes you are adding a lot of permission, because you are segregating a lot of your permission of your application. So maybe you can have some problems in the logouts, for example, because the token is sent via query string. So in your query string, you have a limit, and you maybe have some errors regardless with this. Okay. For this reason, we decided to create an open source project called Balea that we are going to show you today how it works. So can you share my screen?
Yeah. And we did
John?
have somebody ask if you can move your mic a little closer to your mouth. They said the sound is not
yeah.
Okay.
Better? Okay,
I think so. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
You can see my screen. Okay.
Yep.
So I'm going to show you Balea. Okay. You can go to our GitHub. It's Sabaril, and you can see all the stuff, but more or less we have 4 projects. Okay, Balea is the core itself, and we have different stores to store the authorization information. Okay, we have a configuration store based in ASP.NET configuration. You can use, for example, a JSON file, okay, or whatever you want. An entity framework store that allows us to store Balea authorization in all the providers that the entity framework core supports, and also an API store for a distribute server. Okay, you can create your own server, your own distributed server for authorization, and the application are calling to the server to retrieve the authorization. Okay, and also we have some samples that we are using for the demo today. So in this way, I'm going to run the demo. I'm going to show you the problem regardless with the job tokens. So currently the approach, I'm going to move this. Okay. So we have some university, okay, some kind of Contoso university. Okay, I'm going to log in. Okay, with this user, Alice. Okay. And you can see here, okay, that we have some permissions and roles into the token. Okay, you can see better this. I go to this endpoint, tokens, okay. And in this case, we are using the ID token because we are using the authorization in the client. I'm going to this web page, jot.io. I'm going to paste the token. Okay, and you can see that we have here, okay, some role with some permissions, okay, and this token has an expiration date that depends on your context. Maybe it can expire in 1 minute, 5 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, 1 day, 1 month, 1 year, depends on, okay. So the problem now is that this is for the perspective of the developer, it's easier to use this approach, because you only need to go to your code, okay, so your application here, the startup, adding some configuration stuff, okay, that add 2 policies that you are required to claim some permissions, okay, and in this case, we have these 2 permissions, create Fritz and read edit, okay, so going to our controller and decorate with authorize, and magically all works, because, yeah, as I told you, authorization in ASP.NET Core is well designed and good. The problem now is that I'm going to change this permission, and I'm going to remove this permission for the user. I can't, okay, because the token has a life, and until expire, I can change this permission, okay? I think that more or less the problem, okay? So now we can do, as I told you, we can create our own custom authorization framework, the tables and all this, and for this reason, we create Balea. So I'm going to add Balea, and the first thing that I'm going to do Okay, here is, I'm going to our identity server test, and I'm going to remove, I don't want permission here, okay, because it's not a good way to model the authorization in the identity provider, because this authorization is coupled, in this case, to the Contos University, for example, the grades or some similar thing. I'm going to add a more generalistic role, like, for example, Alice, instead of to be teacher, is an employee, and maybe is a teacher in Contoso University, but in a forum application, maybe is an administrator. So for this reason, you can model in one place all these kind of things. The same, for example, for Bob. I'm going to remove the permission. Bob is going to be, for example, substitute. I'm going to remove Mary, okay, and it's not a student, for example, it's a customer, more generalistic roles, okay? So now we are going to our startup, okay, here, and I'm going to remove this authorization, okay, and I'm going to add magically some code that are working with Balea, okay? I'm going to explain to you in a moment how this works. Okay, so first of all, we are in some services for Balea, okay, at Balea, and we have some options to configure. In this case, I'm configure Balea to using the JOT claims, okay, because as you know, there is a long history about the claims from Microsoft and JOT. You have some different namespaces, but in this case, I'm going to use the standard of OpenID Connect, okay, for role and for name, okay, and also I'm going to say Balea how to find the user ID, okay, in this case, the claim SAT in the claims principal, in this case, in the identity. And the token, so as you can see here, is SAT, okay? We can add more claims if you want. For example, we are using, for example, a client ID. So we can authorize only a flows machine to machine. So if an API call an API, we can give some authorization to this API to get information in this API, maybe write permission, and this kind of thing. So it's not coupled to a user. You can use in flows to machine, okay?
Okay, I have a few questions. Is now a good time to ask, or should I wait a bit?
Sorry? Yeah.
Okay, one question, and I think I missed it, is, so Balea is mapping the authorization. It's deciding what roles have what permissions. Where is that mapping? Where did we map that students can, or that teachers can write grades and students cannot write grades?
Okay, so yeah, we have a store. We added this entity framework store, okay? We are adding all these kind of tables.
Okay.
We have two different stores. Yeah. The first one is configuration store. You can map this information in your config, like JSON or your environment variables or any other configuration provider. But for real applications, we have also an entity framework store, and you can map this information in a SQL Server, tables, or any other entity framework core provider.
Okay. Yeah. And can it pull from other configuration providers? Like, for instance, if I wanted to map it in, I don't know, something else, Key Vault or something, or is it it's okay.
Any configuration provider.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So another thing is, you mentioned identity server, and I just had some questions on how this relates to identity server and policy server and that sort of stuff.
No, it's totally decoupled from the authentication mechanism. You can use Azure ID, cookies, or identity server. For the demo purpose, we use identity server because it's easier to add to the solution, but it's totally decoupled from the authentication method.
Okay, so that's important, I think, to clarify, is identity servers, the focus for identity server, how it's like shipped with ASP.NET Core, is that's for authentication, not authorization.
Yes.
Authorization. Yeah. Okay, good.
Okay. And with the other question is do the same work as policy server do, but policy server is a commercial product, not an open source product. But we can do some similar things.
Okay. And then one other question is, can this work with like Blazor and AD B2C?
Yes.
Because this is just this is more like on the server hosting side, right? So anybody, okay.
The authentication for us is not important. We can work with identity server, Azure AD, or B2C because it's different from authorization, and also it can work in Blazor.
Great. Okay. All right. Thanks.
So I'm going to show you because maybe it's more clear if I show you, for example, you can use the configuration. Okay, this is an example of how to configure in Balea using, for example, the configuration store. So you can store your configuration in a JSON file. This is good for testing or for demos, or for example, if you have some simple application. But for production scenarios, it's better to use Entity Framework Core as a distributed database, for example. Yeah. But the way that you can add the applications, you have applications in Balea, the concept that you can have more than one applications in Balea, okay? And this application has roles, okay? The roles has a name. Yeah, this is a teacher role, for example. You can enable or disable roles. The roles also has permissions, okay? In this permission, you add some subjects. This is the claim ID sub. It's the way that you can correlate the identification of the user in your identity provider, okay, into this application. This is the way that Balea can go to the database or to the configuration store, okay, to obtain the authorization for this user. Okay.
This is the map that John asked.
Yeah. This is the magic that Balea is under the hood. The good thing is, for example, maybe you can imagine that you have 1 million of teachers. So I'm going to add 1 million of subjects here? No, because we have some kind of magic. This is the way that they told you before, the more the generalistic roles. So we have some kind of things, mappings. So for example, if you add some user the role customer, okay, we can do in Balea to create a mapping between the customer, every customer that you tag in your identity provider is going to be a student in this application. So you don't need to add a lot of subjects, for example. This is another way to find this authorization, Michael.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me just clarify one more time because it was confusing for me and I think it may be for others too.
Yeah.
So somebody again said this is easier than Microsoft Identity or Identity Server. And what I said was that you would use this with Identity or Identity Server. And this is a difference. Those Microsoft Identity or Identity Server handle the who is the user, and what you're doing is authorization, which is what can the user do.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
They solve a different problem. Identity handles who is the user. Identity Server handles who is the user in addition to what the user can do in some context, or can this app talk to this other application, and they handle the mapping, the general mapping of my app has these concepts. How do they map to the credentials that I've been given?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So if there are any doubts, but the thing is that the Balea is decoupled from the authentication mechanism. So no, you can use Identity Server, Okta, Auth0, Azure B2C, Azure ID, cookies, whatever. Okay. So this is not related. So this is the way.
Like anything, this is something that adds on, right? This is people are getting a little worried, like, oh no, this replaces this or this, and it's
No, it's like a framework on top of the authorization to facilitate the way that developers deal with authorization, for example. Yeah. So
and I like what you're showing there with like there are different ways of doing this, and you can try and include roles in with your JOT tokens and all that. But this is nice because this separates those things out. So then I can say, because of my change in my policy, teachers now don't directly enter the grades. Those go through the grade office or something, and I can remove that permission from the teachers, and it doesn't break all the other things, and my tokens aren't all invalid and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay.
So continue with the demo. So we have configured Balea, so you can configure some options, and we are adding Entity Framework Store. So it's going to create the database. Okay. So I'm going to remove some line here, okay? Comment some line solution explorer, okay? Not in configuration store here in program, okay? So we are going to migrate the database and we are going to create the database, okay? So now I'm going to run again the application and we are going to see the magic, okay? We're going to create the migrations, the database, and so on. And we are going to connect again to the application, okay? Now it's creating the database here. You can see the migrations. I'm going to show you the schema of the database. You can see all the tables, all these kind of things, okay? It's creating, adding some roles, adding some sheet. I'm going to log out and log in again, working with Balea, okay? So Alice, and I think that it's going to be more clear now. Okay, so what happened here? So permissions have been disappeared from the identity token. We are tagging the user with a claim role employee, more generalistic, in order to have these mappings on these kind of things. And Balea is working now. Balea is adding a new identity. Okay, this is the federation. This is the authentication scheme through the identity server or whatever. Okay, and here we have Balea. So with this subject, okay, with this claim subject, Balea is looking into the database the authorization for this user. We are creating some sheets, so there are some sheets in the database. So you can see that this user is a teacher with these permissions. The good thing of this is that the demo is working. Also, we can go to, for example, to view grades and edit grades. So the authorization is working magically. Okay. So, for example, now the cool thing, if I go to my SQL Server Explorer, okay, I'm going to do some zoom. This is the database, Contos University, with all the tables, okay, the applications, delegations, mappings, permissions, tasks, policies, role mappings, and so on, so on, so on. We have some data here, okay. Sorry. For example, we are storing the subject, okay. This is the subject Alice, okay. This is the ID of the user, the claim subject, okay. And also we have some roles, okay. Here, teacher, for example, okay. Student, substitute. The good thing now is that you can see this enabled. I can go to this. Sorry.
Yeah, it jumps around.
Yeah, go to here, refresh, and the authorization disappear. So I can change the authorization and not cut into the authentication. So I can change. If I go to course, I receive an access denied because you are not a teacher and you don't have any permissions to access to this area. So I can change in real time the authorization. Okay. So if I'm going to enable again the role, okay, and refresh again, go to the profile, the authentication, okay, in this case, the schema Balea is finding this user, the role is enabled, so you can go and you can go to the course. So
now you're showing making these changes in the database. Is there like a management, UI or something that I could use instead of that?
Yes, we have some UI, but we have some bad news because the UI is a commercial product.
Oh, okay.
It's not open source project right now, but you can share, Luis. It's not a problem.
I can share.
Yeah, you could show it, and then
Yeah, the thing is this. We have. Sorry, give me one moment.
So the idea there, this is mapping. This is something where I could write my own custom thing because this is just mapping in a database.
Yeah.
And here you're showing this is a product on top of it.
Yeah,
I feel like, and then I feel like to be fair here too, like the identity server team does also, they have policy server, which is a paid product, but that handles this sort of mapping similarly, right?
I see the question in the chat from Dominic. Dominic is one of the founders of Identity Server, and to be clear, Balea is some similar that policy server do, and is one of our inspiration is the same concepts that policy server do that the team of Dominic create. But we change some things, and we try to do open source these projects and do another features like delegations and ABAC support in different way that policy servers manage these things.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And
in this case, yeah.
And the base Balea part is open source.
This is only the one commercial part. This is the UI, but the UI, you can build the UI. The UI is on top the database, so you can create your own server. Okay, this is
okay. I just have to be fair and shout outs to Dominic and the identity server team and all that. Nice. Yep.
So this is the way you can have the roles, the permissions. You can change here and enable or disable the mappings. You have some permissions. You have the users. You can change some user, for example, in Contoso to make some kind of roles dynamically. So the API store is open source, so you can see the API endpoint. So you only have to implement your own server on top of the entity framework store.
Okay, so to make sure I understand too, if I want to implement my own dashboard, I don't have to go and directly manipulate the database and the entity framework level. You have APIs that allow me to configure that.
Yeah, you have some here. You have some only the API store. The API store, you can see here. You need this endpoint in your server. Okay, this is querying the database, and give you some authorization with some contract. Okay, but the API store is open source. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so one more thing. Okay, I'm going to show you, for example, something that we have in Balea. Some people are asking about you can use in Blazor, of course, and maybe in the future we're adding some tag helper for Blazor, some components or some similar things. Now, for example, for MVC, we have some tag helpers. If I go to the view to the curves, okay, we can remove this, okay, and adding some tag helper here. You can see the tag helper, okay, Balea. This is the Balea, the permissions that you need, the grades read, grades edit, and so on, okay. If I go and run again, the application, okay. If we go to course, you can see that this is a teacher that had view grades, edit grades, but you can see logout, for example, login with a student, for example. This is Mary and a student. Mary, you go login. Okay, the mapping is working. Okay, this is working with the mappings that I show you. You can see only that you can view grades. If you try to go to edit grade, you receive an access denied. Okay.
Okay.
This is a tag helper for MVC. You can use in your Razor pages on MVC.
Okay, that makes sense. Hey, we had a great question, I think, come in from Jeremy Sinclair, and he's asking, and I can see like Contoso has maybe a billing office and a student grades and multiple different websites, right? Can I run Balea as kind of a central service that a lot of different applications share?
Yes, because you can create as many applications as you want in the database. The only thing that you need in Balea, for example, in the options, you can go, for example, to the options in Balea. By default, we are using an assumption that if you don't specify the application, we use some default application. Okay?
Yeah, Luis, but I think the question of Jeremy makes sense to create an API store, not to access to the database from different applications, because in business product, probably you don't have direct access to the database.
Okay.
And it makes sense if we create a HTTP store, you query the store, and the database is only accessed by this store, not for all the applications.
Yeah.
I think the question is related with this.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Our API store has a cache mechanism in order to avoid to make so many calls to the server, because maybe you can change the authorization a lot of times. So you can cache the information as many times as you want.
But probably the question is about security, because all the application need to access to the same database.
Yeah.
And in this database, you have all the permissions.
Yeah.
And probably the question is related with this.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it is because Jeremy liked your answer.
Yeah. I think it's a good idea to create a store that you can query the store using HTTP API instead of direct access to the database. It's not difficult to do, and it's a good feedback. And we can add to our backlog, I think.
Or pull requests are welcome.
Yes, always.
Yeah.
Okay, so more cool things. Okay, delegations. No? Okay, so sometimes in the enterprise application, for example, workers leave your company maybe due to an illness, or better to take a holidays. Okay, Easter holidays, for example, the next week. So maybe you can delegate your permissions, okay, to some colleagues in order to make your tasks when you are not in the company during this time. So for this reason, we create the concept of delegation. I show you in Balea, you have some delegations, okay? In delegations, you only need who delegate, in whom delegate, okay? From to, you can specify from two dates between you can one delegate, and the selected, okay? Because you can have more than one delegations, and you can enable or disable this delegation and act on behalf of some user now and act on behalf of some user next, okay? So in this case, it's the same. I'm going to show you here, but in the database, it's more or less the same. So for example, I'm going to connect like Bob. Bob is a substitute. It's not a teacher, but sometimes substitute teachers when takes some holidays. Okay, so I'm going to log out, and I'm going to log in with Bob. Okay, Bob. Okay, in the profile we can see Bob is a substitute. Okay, they can go to course, but they can do anything in the application. Okay, so in this case, Alice are going to leave the company 1 week or 1 year, depends on, and are delegating the authorization, her tasks, her permissions to Bob. Okay, so if I go to the database here in the delegation table, view data, I'm going to select this delegation. This delegation is from yesterday to 1 year, okay? A lot of time, okay?
Yeah.
So now, if I refresh here, Bob is acting as a teacher, okay? And now has permissions to read and edit, but Balea add some delegated by claim. So you can use in order to know if this user are acting on behalf of this user. So you can have, for example, in your table, 2 columns like modify by on behalf of, and you can say that this grade is modified by Bob acting on behalf of Alice. Okay, and the time from the delegation, you can access the delegation. The cool thing is that you can change this delegation in real time. Of course, they can expire. We can add here an expiration date, and automatically the delegation disappears because it's expired. Okay.
Okay.
This is another.
So a question came in, and I'll try and answer it to see if I understand correctly. So the question here is, how does this cover the case when an unexpired JOT token with change permission is denied or will be denied? But I think the case here is that those permissions are not in the JOT token. Only the authentication is in the JOT token. So there's no problem because the application. Now, I guess a question with this is does this add a lot of overhead to the application? Because in a sense, putting the permissions in the JOT token is kind of caching it. You know what I mean? So whereas here, you're continually reauthorizing.
Yeah.
It's probably not. I mean, it's a trade-off, but I think it's, and I guess you could cache at some level if you needed to, right?
You can cache. Yeah.
I think the point you've shown here is you probably don't want a cache because that locks up your authorization into these tokens, and that's not the right place for them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So more questions?
I think there are some more interesting questions. Is on delegation, if the original role is revealed?
Actually not, but maybe it's a good idea also to add the original role for the user.
Yeah, because you can have many roles for the same identity.
For example, here I'm going to, in this case not, because as you can see, previously is acting as a teacher, but maybe we can add some original role when are under by a delegation and adding this role. Maybe it's a change that we can add. Yeah.
Okay, we had a few questions on implementation, like if I've got an existing application, how hard would it be to implement this in my existing application? I think that's a hard question without looking at the code, but I'm guessing this is basically depends how much you've hard-coded your authorization into your controllers and into your application. If it's abstracted out, it would probably be relatively easy.
Yeah. Depends on, this is the answer. But as you can see, it's not so complicated. You are using some approach to store the permissions or roles in job tokens. As you can see, adding Balea is quite easy and quickly, to run with this approach. So,
okay. One more from Jeremy here.
Yes.
He's using up all his questions. How can I hook this with identity or existing user stores, AD, LDAP, AAD? And I guess, again, here, or the thing he's drilling into is grouping roles. So.
Okay. The question is, we don't have the user store. This is the authentication. It's not the Balea scenario. The authentication is on identity server, on your Azure AD, and we map some of the claims to new roles or to new permissions in every application. We map the role in Azure ID or identity server to a new roles or to new permissions in this app. But for us, it's not important the authentication part. Okay? I think it's to be clear.
That's the key point, right? Yeah,
yes.
There's the who the user is and what they can do, and you're only concerned with what they can do.
Yes, we work with the identity and map the current identity of the application with some permissions, some roles for this application. But we work with the identity once it's authenticated, not before authentication.
Okay.
Yeah. So one another way to look at it is if you are using SPNet Core Identity, for example, and you have roles, the roles are for things that are meaningful to identity. Now, when you move into a world where you have an identity provider on top of your identity, that you suddenly start needing to talk to different APIs in different contexts, all the roles in your identity store not always cleanly map to the roles that you have in a specific API. And the job that Balea does is to go from the role on identity or on identity server or whatever authentication mechanism you have into the roles and permissions that are specific to your app. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Ruiz, can you continue?
Okay, so next cool thing. Okay, so we are going to see more or less RBAC authorization, role-based access control using roles and permissions. But at the beginning, we told you that sometimes the authorization is more complex. So you have more business complex, like depend, for example, on the context. Depend on the context. What's context? For example, the role, some claim of the user, the value that you are receiving in some action of the controller itself, and all these kind of things. Okay. So for this reason, in the current version, okay, this is in preview 6 that are going to release in a few weeks, Unai and me decided to create some more dynamic authorization mechanism, because in this way you can use sometimes, for example, I don't know, you can create your requirement handlers using some complex business logic. The problem with the requirement handler itself is that it's something in the business chain. You have to go to this requirement and change the requirement and redeploy the application. You can change this behavior without redeploying the application. Okay.
Yeah.
So for this reason, create some ABAC authorization-based access control. Okay, I'm going to show you now. For this reason, in version 6, we have created a custom DCL language using an LR. So here in authorization, here, ABAC. Okay, you can see that we have some grammar. Okay, this is Balea authorization language grammar. Okay, so it's a way to express in more common language our authorization policies. Okay, so in this case, this is a grammar using an LR. Okay, with some action and some permission. I'm going to show you the test, and you can see more about this. Okay, you can see in our text the val grammar. Okay, and see some scenarios like this. This is our language. Okay, for example, you define a policy, in this case, example, with a begin, and you can add one or many rules. In this case, add cardiological nurse to permit or deny. In this case, you are permitting if the role is nurse, okay, and the action is medical record. Okay, we have some. The way that it is working this is using some property bag. And out of the box, we are providing some property bags, okay?
3 property bags: subject, resource, and action.
Yeah, where is the context here? Okay, I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you, for example, the
parameter
user property bag, for example. This is one property bag, okay? For this reason, you can use in this context of the role, the name, the sub, the email, the given name, and the family name. You can change all these properties in the Balea authorization language, okay? The same for resource, okay? You can use in the metadata endpoint for MVC, another good addition to the framework, in order to show, for example, the controller, the action, parameters, okay, as you can see here, parameters that are coming from the URL, all these kind of things. And also, the last is parameter property bag that you can see here. You can use values from the HTTP context request. In this case, for example, query string, okay, or the form. We are going to show you an example later about this, okay? So more or less it's a common language, okay? And you have some table that is policies that you can store these policies. So I'm going to show you some example here, some business case. Imagine that you have to view grades and edit grades. But imagine that you can validate these grades, okay? Okay, this grade is correct, so I'm going to validate for this student, okay? And you want a more business robust logic, no? To do this more than one permission, okay? So in this case, we are going to add this code, okay, to the controller. Imagine, go to the entity framework code store. So grades controller. Okay. So in this case, we have I'm going to stop this. The action, okay, to validate. In this case, using RBAC. If you can edit, you can view the validation. But when you are posting the information, okay, we are not using this authorized. This is RBAC authorized, and this is ABAC authorized, that they are going to use this policy that we are going to store in the database, okay? Using this Balea language. And also, you can tag with the ABAC parameter the values that they coming from the request, in this case, the form, okay, to use in the policy, okay? So in this way, depends on if you are or have this permission, you are going to access or not access. So the policy is something like this. Now I'm going to show you in a, I think that I have a notepad with a rule. Okay, here. Imagine this rule for a substitute, okay? For Bob, for example. We are to deny a substitute, okay? To validate grades, okay? If you are substitute, you are in the grades controller, and the value of the grade that you have to validate is greater than a minus, okay? In this case, the value is 6, okay? You are not going to allow to validate this grade, okay?
Okay.
So if I go to the application, okay, we are going to show you this moment. I'm going to run. This same policy is storing in the database, okay? The same policy that I showed you in Notepad is storing in the database.
Okay, so the key value here, like when I look at this, like DSLs, there's a trade-off to them. It's another thing to manage and learn and validate and all that kind of stuff. But the value is that you can store these rules in the database as opposed to with C# code, it's easy to write and debug, but it's less difficult to.
It's difficult to change in real time.
You need to deploy your application to change your code to manage the permissions. And with this DCL, it's more human language and it's easy to update in database to change some parameters.
And then with the DSL, often the idea is that this would be written and administered by a business expert rather than a programmer, potentially.
And sometimes it's not. You need more information than the role of permission. It's not enough information to deal with the logic. So in this case, you can see this substitute. Sorry, I have one problem. Sorry, I have one problem because I missed some permissions. Give me one moment. Role permissions. View data, role, view data. The role is substitute to view data and role permission. I think is read. That they can change the permissions in real time. Okay, great read. So changing the database. So okay, I'm going to add also the permission to right. I think it's correct. Okay, let's set it. So if I go to course, okay, we can validate grades. So if I try to validate an A+, okay, it's access denied because you don't have this permission. But if I return to validate grades and try to validate under, okay, below A+, for example, B+, you can see that I'm entering the controller because the value is 6. So it's not greater than 6, okay? The cool thing here is I'll show you can change this validation, of course. You can go, for example, in real time, go to the database, okay? We are going to the policies table. Sorry. Your data. This is the policy that I show you later, and I can change this value, okay? For example, 3, okay? So in this case, if I go to the course and validate grades, now I can validate a B+. So I can validate another, for example, like C. Okay. So you can change these rules dynamically. So if business want to change the rule, you only have to modify the policy without recompiling and deploying the application again. So you can create, you can create complex rule. This is an easy rule, but you have rules, for example, with and, ors, and some similar thing, and also with more rules, okay? For example, permit these nulls to medical reports, but you are going to deny an ors with medical reports with the name
for this specific user.
For this specific user, or for this specific role, or for this specific value. So,
okay, is this language? Is this something that you invented? Is it based on something? Is it?
Yeah, the BAL is there is a standard on the W3C. It's a standard language that is alpha, but alpha is more complicated, and we think it's better to start to create a more simple language than alpha. But the idea is also based or inspired on alpha standard language for authorization attribute-based language.
Okay. Let me see. A few other questions. We had a few people looking at, like, can you observe just when the authorization changes, or are you doing this under the hood? In other words, like, instead of every time reading from configuration, can we just observe the configuration?
Be reactive. Yeah. No. In this case, you have to query the database. We don't have some mechanism to observe the changes and repress dynamically the authorization.
All right. Let me see. Some questions on using at, like, modular development, and some other questions about if it can be done at different layers. For instance, like at the application layer and not presentation. My understanding is this is just, it's way down. You could use it wherever, right? Because it's just.
Yeah, so we have all the service as a public class, and you can use in the layer that you think. But for us, we think that the root is where you need to check your authorization.
Okay.
Yeah.
Question here about encrypting the policy data. I think this is the case of the BAL rules that you showed.
Yeah. No, currently it's in text plain in the database. So maybe it depends on if your database using some encryption out of the box, like SQL Azure or some similar thing. Okay, encryption at a rest, but in our case, it's using text plain in the database. Okay.
But exactly like you said, if you're storing in SQL Azure, you can just turn that on and you can say encrypt at rest, and it's all encrypted.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Let me see. And somebody said, I don't like using a constant string. Well, this is an option, but you also showed previously mapping in a lot of different ways. So this is if you want to do business rules in a database, you can.
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing, this is asking, how do you do authorization based on a person being a member of a department? I think that's kind of what you're showing, is like, instead of a person being a teacher, you could say they're a member of the teacher department or something. It's kind of
also yes, you can add some claims based on the department, or maybe you can use this way. You can use a BAL language in order to use some property bag parameters. You can create your own property bag.
Yeah, but all the claims is in the subject. If
but all the claims
department, you can use subject dot department.
Yeah.
And set the value. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
There are other questions that is interesting. Is, does the solution fully implemented alpha language?
No. I didn't know what that was. I didn't even.
This is a subset of the alpha language. It's our language. In the roadmap, in the future, we are trying to implement the full specification of this language. But for the moment, is our DCL, is our language.
Yeah.
It's a subset that you can do with the full language.
Yeah. A first step.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's interesting in the chat. Some people really don't like hard-coded strings with code and stuff, and I understand. But the storing rules in a database where they can be maintained, you need some sort of language, and it's all going to be a string no matter what. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a question on authentication with Google and Facebook users. So I think the same thing would happen. You would have a user is authenticated, and then you're just handling the mapping afterwards, right?
Yeah. You can use, for example, the claim, but you can use another claim, for example, email and so on. So you can configure Balea as you want in this case, looking for the claim to map with the database or with the configuration stuff.
Okay. Here's an interesting question is, do we have any successful production stories? And how
Yes.
mature the framework is?
In this case, I have to say that we are eating our own dog food, because we have some product that this is in many customers, many important customers, that this is Sidra. Sidra is a data lake product that are under the hood. All the authorization is based on Balea. So in this case, I think it's working. And also we have some customers that they are using in Balea, and they adopt Balea as authorization framework, because as I told you at the very beginning, there are many things in the company that are doing the same stats in different ways in different projects. So Balea put in common all these things to make an authorization framework common for all the applications. Also, we are working in different SDKs. Currently, I'm working in a Express using a Node.js, using Balea in Node.js, for example, like maybe an approach, because Balea using middlewares, and we can add some kind of authorization middleware to use like in ASP.NET Core. So maybe we can add to more frameworks like, I don't know, Spring Boot or Flash or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. So, we've shared I've shared the repo link a few times in the chat. As far as for people to keep up, they should follow the repo, I guess. Do you have tutorials or getting started things in the repo? Anything for people that want to learn more?
Yeah, if you go to the repo, you have a read docs when you have some examples, how to use Balea, how to add Balea, how to configure, all this kind of stuff.
Can you show? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to Balea. Okay, here. And you go here, you have the Balea is currently the release is 5, but we have the preview, okay, in Sys, you can download. And if you go here, what is Balea, and read the docs, here you have the Balea, okay, the terminology, okay, the application, roles, and permission, and so on, okay, the store, and getting started with Balea in ASP.NET Core, how to do the setup, how to define application, how to define roles, using the roles in controller and actions, using permissions, and also how to test in the authentication, the schemes that are also you use. In this case, imagine that authentication scheme is cookies, so it's totally decoupled. So in this case, you can use cookies and Balea without any problem, okay? How to configure the entity framework store, the migration, the tables, and topics about the configuring some fallback mechanism. What happens when the user is not authorized? For example, you can redirect whatever or doing whatever. It's a request delegate. By default, we developed 2 request delegate, but you can create your own request delegates. Dealing with claim maps, okay? This is a very, very good post from Dominic about this problem. So if you read this, it's so good, this blog post of Dominic about this. Okay, and using Balea with specific scales. Because this is another thing that maybe in one application you have two authentication schemes, and you don't have to Balea works with both, and you can say Balea which authorization scheme have to work.
The idea is, in one application, do you have a identity provider for internal users, and also you have social logins, and you can configure Balea to work with these different schemes and perform some different checks for each scheme.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then the last thing here is just as far as like getting involved and looking forward. Like, so you showed that you're currently on version 5 something and 6 is in preview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what's the kind of roadmap? What are the main things that are coming in 6?
So in 6, we have the addition of Balea authorization language.
Okay.
Yeah. We are going to add some things that, for example, our product manager for Sidra told us about, for example, to add some kind of logs to the roles in order to avoid to delete roles accidentally, this kind of thing. So it's like in Azure portal, the logs for resource groups, was this functionality for roles that maybe are, this way. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, this is great. Anything else you wanted to cover? It seems like it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you have any question or more, we are in Twitter. This is our handle. So we accept all contributions. Pull requests are welcome. So yeah,
awesome.
Feedback are welcome.
Okay, great. Wow, well, this was a great overview. I appreciate your explaining, and I feel like I learned some kind of fundamental things by looking at them as completely separate topics today. So I feel like I finally understand some things that were jumbled in my head before. So, so this is great. So, stay tuned, people watching, for we've got the Visual Studio Toolbox coming up in 15 minutes, and I think we'll wrap right there. So,
okay.
All right. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all.